All right. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, folks. Want to thank this forum for an opportunity to unveil what is the biggest software release since the inception of this company. And there's a unique relationship with this forum. Way back in Tech Field Day 4, when we first introduced the company, we unveiled this whole what Actifio was, this idea about how data as an asset needs to be managed very differently. And since then, a lot's happened in the company. Since then, when we started out presenting this at this forum in Tech Field Day 4, there were probably 4 customers. Today, Actifio has about 2,700 enterprise customers across 37 countries. And we enable these organizations to use data as a strategic asset to allow their developers to develop applications faster, their data scientists to drive analytics faster, their security people to do a lot more around security and compliance, while still allowing the operations people to make sure data is protected, it's highly available, and completely independent of what infrastructure you run on. That's the mission we set out. We set out making data the new asset, making it usable, and not having this notion of a long tail of data that's never been useful. So we pioneered this whole space. And in the process, we spent a lot of time working with users, partners, and independent thinkers like you folks on trying to figure out what is it about data that makes an organization start using it as a very, very strategic asset. And in the process, we've developed a very strong portfolio of patents. If you look at, if you ever go back and get a chance to look at what this company has done, there's a tremendous amount of focus on understanding data in the context of applications, data in the context of how business runs. And in the process, we also, this year, were recognized as the leading for the data protection and recovery capabilities for the enterprise from across the board. We've been doing this for a while, but for the first time, we focused on backup and recovery as one of the markets. And we'll talk a little more about where all this lines up. Now, as most of these organizations start to use Actifio as the new foundation, they use this new data platform where operations people allow the developers to come in, access through an API. People are running analytics. People are building new applications using data as the API to come back and do things like integrity checks, things like security stuff. One of the things that's happened is we've had to go change the operations model of the company to be a long-term viable partner. So unlike a traditional startup, we are from the East Coast, from the Boston area, and maybe we're a little old-fashioned. We've decided a company is really not a business until it's profitable. So for the last 4 quarters, while we're growing fast, we put our head down and started building a company that was about being sustainable, about one that's actually a true partner in the long term for many of these enterprise customers. So that's a summary. Long way from the first Tech Field Day 4. Long way from having the 4 customers we had when we started out at Tech Field Day 4 with about 15 employees. Significantly different in terms of the entire value proposition. 4 years ago, or actually 2.5 years ago, the first 4 years, 100% of our business was around data protection. We were the world's fastest, most scalable data protection. We focused on some of the largest organizations across 7 different verticals. Financial services, the largest organizations in financial services, service providers. You look at healthcare, energy, airlines, retail. Pretty much across the board, where there is a lot of data or where there are a lot of users who use data, you fundamentally see Actifio playing out a key part in providing data as a service. Now, during this process, a bunch of stuff happened, especially about 2.5, 3 years ago. Early 2015, we started seeing a shift in how our customers, our enterprise customers, started perceiving their business and their market. So today, I'll talk about 2 things. One, obviously, we'll talk a lot about 8.0. Big release. Took us about 2.5, 3 years to build this. Took us an enormous amount of collaboration across hundreds of partners, lots of customers, and a whole bunch of industry analysts. But more importantly, I think I want to share with you how we got here. What is the journey that took us to 8.0, so you have a context of why it wasn't just we built something because it is cool. We built something because it is truly essential for the enterprise customers that we deal with. And across the board, you will see the same theme. You will see Actifio much more pragmatic, much more practical about what it means to help an organization as opposed to yet another new shiny toy that we built and hope somebody will come. So in this process, let me start with, let me pause here and see if there's any questions before I jump to the journey and then the destination here. Okay, so quickly, the number one thing, probably the most widely used word right after cloud is something called digital transformation. But this is a key part of how people have thought about businesses. Now, across the board, we've seen companies that have completely changed what a business looks like. And in this shifting priorities, very interesting things happen to IT. Right? There was a time when, in a physical business, vendors innovated something, and businesses leveraged that to go back and do something innovative with it. Roadmaps were defined by vendors. Roadmaps were defined by technologists. Rosetta Stone is an example of a company that uses Actifio. Those who remember, how many of you know Rosetta Stone? It's a language, teaches you Italian, teaches you how to converse in various languages, used to ship CDs. The big problem was to come back and be a digital company where I'm the next Netflix, delivering this online, delivering it on the fly, customizing it, mass customization. Very interesting things happen to these organizations when they become digital businesses. The speed at which IT is changing is not because it is being driven by the vendors anymore. It is because it is being driven by the business. The business is saying, guys, if you guys as vendors don't supply what's required, I'm going to build it on my own. And we have seen this. Some of the best innovations in technology haven't come from people who used to build products. They've come from people who've been building businesses. And that has huge implications. I mean, whether it's, you've seen the complete shift in the industries across the board. All the old guards have gone off, and you have people who have a real business building IT stuff. This was probably the number one revelation we started seeing in 2015. And that has implications on three big things that we started to follow. Number one, cost. We have one of the largest financial services organizations that deployed Actifio 4 years ago. The mission was simple. I will not buy any more storage for the next 3 years. I already have so much of it. If I can find a way to optimize how my data is stored, managed, used, I'm going to change almost $180 million worth of expenses over the next 3 years. Huge. That was the big goal. As of about a year and a half ago, as they wanted to become a digital fintech company, not a bank anymore, but a fintech company, you have 6,000 developers. You have data scientists trying to access data. And the number one thing for them was about speed and agility. It wasn't about saving money. It's about how fast can I move? How fast can these developers actually develop new applications? How fast can their cycle time be improved? How can I analyze more data? How can I actually get real data? This whole notion of data warehousing kind of completely goes away. Imagine this. You have 6,000 developers being paid very well, and they wait for days to get access to information. That's ridiculous. It is impossible to run an organization that way. Moved huge. In fact, we used to talk about costs 3 years ago. We used to say, we'll drive out huge amounts of costs, 60 to 180% of expenses that you're going to spend over the next 3 to 5 years. That's almost gone by the wayside. I cannot save myself into growth. Well, that is the theme. I have to find a way to come back and be more faster and be more agile. The second part, I'm sure all of us have seen, is the shift from infrastructure and software-centric to having operations people deliver a service. It could be private, it could be very specialized microservices, but I have to deliver a service. And that means a couple of things. It means scale, it means heterogeneity, it fundamentally means a very different way of thinking about our consumers, which is the developers, which is the data scientists, which is the security people. And in the process, we used to spend a lot of time with IT operations people. But they've all evolved into DevOps people. They've all evolved into analytics people. They've all evolved into focusing on things that matter to the business now. The three big things that caused us. And there are two problems that we saw out of this big shift. Number one was the data problem. A curve, so this is a classic graph we saw. Everybody knows data exponentially decays over time. That was the formula we all lived by. The longer the data exists, the more useless it gets. And it goes into Iron Mountain somewhere, and I never have to look at it again. But turns out, if there's an IoT sensor generating data, which is a production app, it is pretty useless by itself. A point of sale data is pretty useless. But when it's combined over time, along with a whole bunch of other data, the value is actually going up, significantly growing up. The analytics have become more important sometimes than even the production application. In fact, many organizations do not even have a production application. They only have analytics applications. And you know many of these organizations. Development has become more valuable. There are organizations we have who called me on a Friday night, this was 2.5 years ago, and said, hey, Ash, system is down. I said, all it was doing is backup for like a few applications. What do you care? He said, no, I have 400 developers. And having your system down is more expensive for me than even having my business production application down, because these guys are an expensive resource. A very interesting scenario, right? So if you're an IT operations person who has to deal with this new datanomics with tools that are designed for the old way of doing data, you need a fundamental paradigm shift on how you think about managing data, how you make it accessible. You need a service. You need a data cloud. You need the ability to have some way for organizations to access the API and collate huge scales of data to come back and make it usable for analytics or development. And then there's the challenge of the cloud, right? The assumption that the cloud is somehow a destination. It's a place, it's somebody's rented data centers. You've seen stickers around. It is not a rented data center. Right? In many cases, you've seen vendors who say, I support 15 clouds because I managed to go use their S3 interface, or I dump data in there. That's not what the users have been asking for. People have been asking to say, look, I need cloud as a way to create a platform that allows me to use these services and deliver data-centric applications. Somebody's very, very good at analytics. I want to be able to we have users like this who take the data, go to Google, run TensorFlow on their app. We have very large service providers who provide DR for that very same app. There are developers who take Oracle instances they have, do development in Oracle Cloud because they provide tools that are best for it. The ability to have each of these platforms provide a very specialized service that I can leverage and use my data to make this happen, that has become a bigger part of the whole story. Not just rent somebody's infrastructure because you got a great deal. And that's a good short-term story. The real story is, how can I go back and never have to? And by the way, I provide my own service too. There are things that I need to own. Nobody's ever talking about, at least our users are not talking about uploading lift and shift and getting out of the entire data centers. Now, what this means is, a long time ago, over 24 years ago, Salesforce pioneered the notion of saying no software, SaaS. And then 10 years later, you got Amazon who came out to show that every blinking light and sheet metal can be converted to an API. Great. Then there's this ultimate middleware called data. Apps are great, infrastructure is great. There's an ultimate middleware called data, which is a problem. It is stateful. It is huge. It has gravity. Moving large chunks of it becomes really, really hard. And so when you think about people developing applications in the cloud, or when I'm thinking about taking my applications, moving into the cloud, I remember an automotive manufacturer who told us about how they've changed the speed from 45 days to something like 4 days running one of these cloud service providers' analytics. And I asked him, how long does it take to get the data to that cloud? Well, that takes 80 days. Of course that takes 80 days. Well, that's great. So we really went from 120 days to 84 days as far as analytics is concerned.
That's a 28%.
Yeah, it is. We said, how about we go from truly 40 days to 4 hours and 5 minutes. Right? That's the story you want. You want the ability to have the mobility of data. So if this is the missing piece, and this is frankly the only thing I own, the only strategic asset I own is my data. Individuals, each of us own the most strategic asset is our data. And what we set out to do was two things. One, fix the problem of making data an asset, a platform, a cloud, my personal cloud as an organization, make it available for any application to use under the operations control and on any infrastructure. My assumption is I have no idea where my applications are going to run. I have no idea where somebody needs access. That developer in Singapore, when he accesses the same database, needs to see completely different fields because it has to comply with the regulatory requirements of Singapore versus if I'm in the Bay Area. This notion of having, and unlike anything else, I think this is probably the toughest part because of the state, because of the nature of security, and because of it's so proprietary. So first thing we set out to do was to enable organizations to truly deliver data as a service. Of course, backup and DR and availability and mobility are built in. Of course. When you're delivering something as a cloud, whether it's infrastructure or a SaaS, there's assumption that implicitly data is built in. 4 years ago, 100% of our business was data protection. As of Q2 of this year, 56% is people using DevOps and hybrid cloud for Actifio, and of course backup is built into it. Nobody's building applications without worrying about making it protected.
Well, they are, they're just not.
They don't know.
Long term.
Yeah. The second part of this was, okay, once we have data as a service, now how do I leverage it across the cloud? So we spent 2 years building and testing every known form of the cloud. And they change, by the way. Every quarter we are starting to see different capabilities. Some are being obsoleted. But we spent a lot of time building a solution that allows me to use the various services completely seamlessly. We have developers, we have organizations that have or had applications in the production data centers. Development happens, 4,000 or 5,000 developers in their own private cloud. Partner like SunGuard is providing disaster recovery services. Long-term retention is happening in Amazon. They're developing applications, Oracle applications in the Oracle Cloud and in the OPC and BMC ones. Microsoft is now taking over some of the Microsoft apps. And sometimes it is the exact same app going in different directions. And sometimes the migration happens and the backup goes back to the original data center. This notion that there's no center of gravity anymore. In fact, if you start thinking about extending this concept to serverless data centers, you can almost imagine storage-less data service, where I literally take data, make it available to a function, and that's basically the direction.
Serverless is bad enough to not go storage.
I know. Even with serverless, there is a server behind it, just that you don't see it. Same thing with data.
Storage.
Yeah.
Thing with storageless. Yeah.
Storageless means, and we'll never remember anything. We don't want that.
Yeah. Well, it's somebody's storage. Yeah. So I think this has become, at the end of what you'll see at 8.0 is just this, the discussion that Brian is going to present. It's just this huge notion that for the first time, I am allowed to focus on my application that uses some data and provides infrastructure, and I can develop it, I can release it, I can share it, and I can scale it to any place. So we sell 3 basic use cases across the same platform. The question is, okay, this sounds very big. How do I get started, right? And the reality is simple. 44% of our business today comes from the world's fastest backup. People, we may not be known for it. Of course, we do VMware backup. In fact, Gartner ranks as the #1, despite what the market perception might be. We're the #1 in virtual environment backups. The largest environments in VMware backups are done by Actifio today, thousands at a time when it comes to scale. We do lots of physical machines. We have people who use HPUX and AIX and AS400 because turns out our organizations have a lot of stuff, including physical and virtual machines. And of course, they have stuff in the cloud. And of course, they have it in somebody else's data center. The assumption starts with, how can I start with the basic responsibility as an ops person to protect data? Second is, what do I do with that data? How do I leverage that? And this has become another 45% of our business. Helping operations people make their developers ridiculously productive. 45% of our customer base today uses that same data that's been captured for backup into helping, and it's not an operation, it's not like you're not a DBA making it available. You just open up an API, you just open up a platform, you put security credentials, and somebody's taking care of accessing it. And about 12% of the business, 11 to 12% is coming from hybrid cloud. As people, our enterprise base, starts to look at, how do I tap into the services being provided by various providers? And by the way, you'll see this today as you go to the demo. There is a lot, as I was talking to Mark, and Howard says this right. I mean, there's a cloud and there's a cloud. Turns out not all of these are cloud, and they're not as advertised. Some are open, some are closed, and you have to, as advisors for our customer base, we have to go back and test every one of these things out and demonstrate what works and what doesn't work. So we spent a lot of time in the last 2 years trying to build around partnering with each of these cloud providers to make it relevant to our customer base. And all of this off of a single platform that allows you to deliver data as a service. Question is, where do you start? Some start with, I've got a backup to modernize my entire backup and budget for backing up my large data centers. I have data consolidation programs. I've got hybrid cloud stuff. You pick one of those. Ultimately, it's the same platform that you come back and use for other stuff. So today we'll talk about 8.0, and there are 5 basic themes we'll talk about that we spent a lot of time working on. Number one, as our enterprise users started to think about, I have to develop applications in the cloud. Today we support 5 cloud platforms completely seamlessly, the same set of tools. They go back and leverage each of these cloud platforms to come back and develop new applications, protect them, move them back and forth. Just the same enterprise experience, except it happens in a platform that we talked about, AWS, Azure, IBM, Bluemix, so I guess soon be called IBM Cloud, Google, and Oracle. Huge integration with all of these. Second one is the cloud mobility, and this is a key. It's one thing to go leverage somebody's assets. It's another to be completely independent of being locked into them. In fact, sometimes you're leveraging assets from more than one of these providers for different functions. And we'll talk a lot about some of the work that's pioneering work. And this is not just about moving stuff. It's about transforming stuff. It's about making sure security is taken care of as it is going from place to place based on what the ops controls are. And the other exciting part is one that, for those who have been in the storage business, we spent very interesting time thinking about, for the last 6 years, we analyzed the data from most of our customers. Object storage was considered a place where data goes to die. It's a graveyard. It's a tape replacement. It's a place where things are slow. Not anymore. We will show you being able to bring up Oracle databases, transactional workloads, directly off of object storage. And if you look at the data numbers, we have a very interesting scenario where in this new world of large amounts of data, things that are secured because of encryption at the source, the conventional notion of having deduplication, the economics don't work anymore. And we're slowly moving towards a paradigm where users are coming to Flash or NVMe variants for transactional workloads and production, and object as the only other storage. There's some very interesting technology we developed that allows for efficient use, and more importantly, transactional capability of object storage, and leverage that either on premises or the variants of various cloud offerings that are across the board. So while you have data all over the place, it's important to make sure you have a single view and the scale of being able to find it, access it, and use it. We'll talk about the world's fastest way of doing it. World's absolutely fastest way of cataloging this. And the catalog is not just this, as with everything else we do, this is a foundation for allowing applications to start using metadata about the data objects, but also soon the content around the object. So you start to get very, very smart about the whole notion of, I've got a data platform. Yes, today I know how to go access the application objects. Now I know a little more about the metadata and soon more about the content. So this is, as much as it's about the usability part, it's an API that's opened up very unique functionality for people to develop new applications around. And the last part is an engagement model that is all about, if you are an Actifio user, you have control of your data. Can I provide a lot of value out of that platform? There's a ton of information inside my data. So we have a Actifio Now that becomes an engagement platform to allow you to derive more information about your data, more information about your users. And it's your own portal. And it's also a way for third parties to start delivering marketplace products for people who are actually using Actifio. So 5 different fundamental capabilities here. And we are very, very excited. We're excited about just going after the continued momentum around speed, about scale, about heterogeneity. I'm truly excited about the repeat business, the keeping the customers happy. Between 74 to sometimes 52% of our business every quarter comes from customers expanding as they become bigger parts of their, as Actifio becomes bigger and bigger part of their data platform. People start using it for many different things that we haven't thought about. But once you have data available through an API and don't have to call an ops person, don't have to worry about how long it's going to take or what storage it's going to come from, or you're going to be taxed. Very, very different way of thinking about innovation. So I'll pause here, introduce my friend, Brian Achilles. Brian heads up, is the global field CTO, heads up all our field operations from a technology perspective. And we'll walk you through, between him and Chandra.
So before we get into the technology discussion, I want to make sure I understand. I heard a great quote the other day. Airplane crashes didn't exist until we created the airplane. When we start to enable the developer to move at a speed faster than operations can support, what's the crash? Where it's a system. Once you remove one bottleneck, another appears.
Yeah.
Where's that next bottleneck?
Yeah. The first thing is, I want to point out, we still sell to operations people, right? This is enabling operations people to move at the speed that the developers want to move or they can move. So it's still, you as an operations person has to deliver this data as a service. And you might choose to say, that developer in the US is not going to access the data in Germany because I put the controls around that. So there's some of that stuff. So it is still, we believe, to scale up in enterprise, it has to be operations person centric. But the biggest part about this one comes in, I'll tell you where the challenge starts to begin. If you think about, so far we were talking about enterprise data, it's my environment. Sometimes I'm sharing, I'm buying weather data from somebody, I'm buying marketing data from somebody, I'm collating some point of sale data from somebody else. But as you get to the point where the controls on sharing become a little lax, so you might be using Actifio, the other party might not. And the proliferation of your data out of the control of the ops person, that starts to become the biggest threat. So this notion that when you make it, very similar to what you've seen with VM sprawl, but you get to the point where everybody's spinning up all kinds of stuff, and sometimes it goes out of control without ops people in control. The good part about data is, data certainly has a lot more ability to be controlled by organizations, but if I'm a developer, I do pull it out and make it available to third party, who I'm not supposed to because I did a DD or a copy of it, I'm probably in trouble. So security would be the big one. Proliferation without the control could be a big issue. Those are the big areas.
Okay, thanks.